It was a cloudy Tuesday morning, the kind of day that goes unnoticed in the routine of those who live in the countryside. Eric woke up early, as he had done every day for the past 3 years. At 22 years old, and with an expression that was always somewhere between distracted and tired, he worked as a gas station attendant at a simple gas station at the entrance to the city. There, with his slightly faded uniform and a clipboard full of notes hanging on the wall of the booth, he spent hours filling up cars, exchanging quick smiles with drivers, and scribbling in old notebooks during breaks. Notebooks that he hid in the employee locker as if they were something shameful. The drawing was the only thing that made the days seem a little different, but no one there knew that. To everyone, Eric was just another quiet boy who said good morning without looking anyone in the eye, and who always ate lunch in the same corner, with the same egg sandwich wrapped in a napkin. That day, things were slow. The digital clock read 11:16, when an old car, the kind you recognize from afar by the sound of its engine, slowly pulled up to pump number 6. It was a burgundy Fiat Premio, with rust marks near the rear-view mirror and a faded sticker on the back window. God is faithful. Eric approached her as he always did, politely asking how much gas she wanted. She smiled kindly and replied, "Full, please," while rummaging through her purse for loose change and papers. That was when Eric looked at her wrist, exposed by a grey cardigan that was slipping slightly down her arm. There was an old tattoo, faded but unmistakable, half a heart with a crucifix in the center. He froze for a second. That image hit him hard. The smell of hot cheese bread, the low music coming from an old radio, the lap where he slept after school. It was her. It couldn't be anyone else. Eric hesitated for a few seconds, trying to gather his thoughts as he finished filling up the car. The sound of the fuel running through the hose seemed muffled, as if the world around him had turned down the volume just so he could hear his own memory better. When he finished, he walked around to the driver's window with the receipt in his hand, but his eyes were no longer on the numbers. They were on the woman's face. She had short, very white hair, and her skin was marked by lines that told silent stories. Still, there was something unmistakable there, the same sweet look, the same patient smile, like someone who listens more than they speak. Eric, his voice shaking a little, ventured, Have you ever taken care of 2 children many years ago? A girl named Margaret and a boy named Eric." The woman stopped, her eyes widening slowly, as if she were going back in time without needing much effort. She put her hand to her mouth and murmured, almost breathlessly, "My God, Eric?" She immediately turned off the engine and got out of the car without rushing, as if she wanted to make sure it was real. The hug between the two was long and silent, but full of unspoken words that pressed together between their bodies. The attendants on the other side of the parking lot watched, not understanding anything. To them, it was just a customer being greeted in an exaggerated way. But there, in that exchange of tight arms, there were years of absence, longing, and unanswered questions. Claudia, now 68, had disappeared from her siblings' lives when Eric was just 10 and Margaret was 12. Their parents, who traveled frequently for work, hired Claudia on the recommendation of a family friend. She took care of them for 4 years, as if they were her own. But suddenly, she stopped showing up. No message, no explanation. And no matter how many times Eric asked, his parents always changed the subject, saying only that she had gone. That still hurt today. Claudia asked to sit on a concrete bench near the entrance to the station, under the crooked shade cast by a stunted tree. Eric, still in shock, excused himself with a quick wave from the supervisor and sat down next to her. Their conversation began with long pauses, as if they were trying to fit the pieces of an ancient puzzle together. She explained that years ago, she had been diagnosed with a serious cancer and had chosen to leave in silence so as not to traumatize the children. At the time, she said, she did not want Eric and Margaret to associate the memory of her with the image of someone sick and wasting away. She said she had tried to write letters, but none had ever been sent. Fear and guilt paralyzed her. When she finished speaking, Claudia let out a long sigh, and Eric fell silent, staring at the ground. The revelation hit him like a stone in the stomach, not because of the abandonment, but because of the silent pain she had carried alone. Margaret's name came up in the conversation like a whisper. Claudia asked about her with a restrained sparkle in her eyes, as if she had already expected the answer but still wanted to hear it. Eric took a deep breath and told her that Margaret had died 5 years ago, the victim of a hit-and-run on her way back from college. She was 24 years old. It was at that point that Claudia put both her hands on her face and cried without making any noise, as if she allowed herself to break down without embarrassing the other person. Eric, instead of comforting her with words, simply touched her shoulder with the same lightness she used when she covered him with a blanket on cold afternoons. It was a moment with no room for explanations. It was just shared pain coming from different places. But now they were on the same concrete bench at a forgotten gas station on the map. There, they were both mourning everything they had lost, but also grateful for what had somehow withstood the test of time. As time passed slowly, and the sun began to peek through the clouds, Claudia and Eric remained sitting there as if they were in a universe apart, oblivious to the comings and goings of cars and horns. She began to tell details of the life she had led after she disappeared, her fight against the disease, the years living alone in a small apartment in the city center, the friends who drifted away over time, and the emptiness left by not having started a family. But it was when she spoke about the dreams she had not fulfilled that her voice really shook. Claudia revealed that she had always wanted to study visual arts, that she had drawn in secret when she was young, but grew up hearing that it was a waste of time, and that she needed a real job. She ended up becoming a nanny out of necessity, even though she had talent and passion. When she looked at Eric and asked if he still drew, it was as if a light bulb had turned on in a dark place inside him. Eric hesitated before answering, but ended up confessing that he did. He told him about the notebooks he hid in the locker at the gas station, the scribbles he made on the back of fuel receipts, the portraits of people he saw passing by every day. He said he never showed his drawings to anyone for fear of being ridiculed or of them hearing what he feared most, that it was just a pastime. Claudia listened attentively, as if each word were an important detail in a picture that she needed to understand in its entirety. And then he said, without raising his voice, "I know what it's like to carry a suffocated dream, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone." That sentence kept hammering away in Eric's head. For the first time in a long time, someone saw something in him beyond his grease-stained blue uniform, and the strangest thing was that this person was precisely the one he believed he had lost forever. Claudia asked to see the drawings. Eric was a little reluctant, but eventually gave in. He went into the employee's locker room, opened the hidden cabinet in the corner, and took out 2 school notebooks with torn covers and yellowed pages at the edges. He sat down next to her again and turned page after page in silence. Claudia didn't praise him excessively, but each comment was clinical. "That look here has life. You captured his loneliness with just one line. That's not just a drawing, Eric. That's a story told with pencil." With each new page, her eyes shone brighter, and the expression on Eric's face, previously shy and defensive, began to open like a crack in a window at dawn. The internal conflict in him was visible, the desire to believe in it, mixed with the fear of appearing naive. But Claudia saw beyond the hesitation, and that's when she said something that would change everything. "You need to study this. You can't bury this talent the same way I buried mine." Eric smiled bitterly and answered almost automatically, "With what, Claudia? I can barely pay the bills here. Studying art is a luxury for rich people." She was quiet for a moment, looking at him as if she were making an important decision inside. Then she opened her bag and took out a white envelope, half crumpled, with her name written in cursive. She handed it to him and said, "I've been saving this for a while, without knowing who it was for. Now I know." Inside was a considerable amount of money. She explained that it was a reserve she had saved for a course she never took. Money that had just been sitting there as a symbol of an interrupted dream. "This money only makes sense if it's used for this, Eric. Go study. You'll really learn. Promise me you'll try," she asked, her eyes brimming with tears. Eric couldn't speak. He just nodded with a lump in his throat and his hands shaking as he held the envelope that to him seemed to weigh more than the entire world. The following days passed in a blur in Eric's mind. He resigned from his job a week later without making any big speeches, just thanking his manager and colleagues with a restrained smile. Most of them didn't understand. "Are you going to make a living from drawing now?" someone even commented. But he didn't mind. He had heard that all his life. With the money Claudia gave him, he enrolled in a technical course in visual arts at a private school in the neighboring city. He took 2 buses a day, woke up at 5 in the morning and returned home at 10 at night, exhausted. But for the first time, he felt like he was going somewhere that made sense. Each class, each technique, each criticism he received from his teachers was a firm step towards a life he never imagined could be possible. Claudia followed him from a distance. She sent short messages asking how his studies were going, and sometimes she called just to listen to him, excitedly tell him about some new discovery. 3 years had passed since that reunion at the gas station. Eric now made a living from his art. He wasn't famous or a millionaire, but he managed to sell his illustrations, participate in independent fairs, and even give drawing workshops to children in a social project. He had set up a small studio in the back of the house where he lived, with walls full of paintings and a makeshift bookshelf with donated paints, brushes, and books. His life wasn't perfect, but it was real. Each achievement came with effort. Each recognition carried the weight of everything that had been denied in the past. Claudia was still present, even though her health was getting more fragile every month. They met up when they could, had coffee together, and talked about art, life, and Margaret. They were simple encounters, but they were filled with an affection that didn't ask for explanations. One day she showed up at the studio by surprise and remained silent for several minutes, just looking at the paintings on the wall. Then she said, "This is where your heart lives, and that gives me peace." Time, as it always does, passed too quickly. Claudia was admitted to the hospital at the end of a harsh winter after a few weeks of fighting recurring infections. Eric went to see her whenever he could. The hospital was small, with a strong smell of disinfectant and peeling walls, but she said that what mattered was that he was there. On one of her visits, she asked him to bring her one of his drawings, any that he had done with her in mind. He chose a graphite portrait in which he had drawn a woman smiling while holding a book on her lap, sitting in a rocking chair with a weak sun streaming through the window in the background. When he handed it to her, she held it as if she were holding something sacred. She didn't say much that day. She just looked at him and said, "Now I know it was worth it." That was the last time they saw each other. Claudia died 2 days later, peacefully, in her sleep. Eric received the news by phone, with his hands stained with ink and his heart aching in a way he couldn't even explain. The woman who had disappeared from his childhood had come back just to make sure he didn't let his own dreams disappear too. The funeral was simple, with few people, but Eric made sure to bring flowers and a framed copy of the drawing she loved so much. He stayed there for a while in silence, remembering her smile, the tattoo on her wrist, the smell of the old car, and her voice saying, "Don't bury your dreams." When he returned home that night, he went straight to the studio. He sat at the table, opened a new hardcover notebook, and wrote on the first page, "For you, Claudia." In the months that followed, Eric immersed himself in art like never before. His work began to attract attention outside the city. He participated in a group exhibition in São Paulo, was invited to illustrate a children's book, and, little by little, the boy who hid drawings in closets became a reference for other young artists who also came from places where no one believed in talent. But despite everything, he never let the story lose its roots. Whenever someone asked him why he started drawing, he would tell them about Claudia, The woman who took care of him as a child disappeared without explanation and returned only to rekindle the flame he didn't even know still existed. Time passed, and Eric's life continued to change. When his first daughter was born, he and his wife had already decided on a name long before the birth. They named the girl Claudia Margaret, a tribute to two loves that shaped who he became, the woman who rekindled his dream and the sister who never left his memory. It was like joining two pieces of heart that time had separated. The name seemed strange to those who heard it because it was so complex and unusual, but Eric always explained it with pride. He said it was a tribute, not a coincidence. His daughter grew up hearing stories about the woman with white hair and a tattoo on her wrist who, one day, showed up at a gas station and changed everything. Eric told these stories with such vivid details that Claudia Margaret swore since she was little that she knew the woman, even though she had never seen her. In the studio, a black and white photo of Claudia still hangs on the wall, next to a drawing made with strong lines and serene eyes, like hers. Eric never sought fame, and he never sought applause, but his work gained ground. His works reached schools, social institutions, and even rehabilitation clinics, where they were used as part of artistic therapies. He used to say that if someone saw one of his paintings and felt the desire to continue, that was enough. He always maintained the humility of someone who came from a concrete floor between grease, gasoline, and silence. But inside him, there was a strength shaped by losses, encounters, and by that specific day, the day a woman stopped her car at pump 6 and without knowing it, rekindled an entire life. That was not just a reunion, it was a journey. And everyone who knew Eric after that moment knew that he was the kind of person who would never have moved on if he had not looked at the past with courage. Claudia left, but she left behind the most important thing, the certainty that sometimes all it takes is a conversation, a look, and a gesture of faith to change the course of an entire life.